Further into chapter 2, why does nobody hate Indonesians? So this is a very puzzling question because they make the largest group of Muslims in the world. I think it's something around 200 millions. So I've never read or heard anything in Europe or North America, anything negative about Indonesians. It's always South Asians, Arabs, North Africans. People talk about the great replacement theory, that Muslims are going to replace us. So why is it that there is not a single, or maybe like one or two, a few of them, few Indonesians in Europe and North America? Like, what are they doing? What are they waiting for? Hello and welcome. My name is William. I am a researcher in sociology at the University of Warwick in the UK, and this is a video series about my latest book, Muslims in the Neoliberal Empire, where I talk about how the society colonizes us, all of us, and what can we do about it. Starting with the Crusades. This is the first instance where Muslims were depicted as the arch-enemy of the West. Specifically, not any kind of Muslim, but Ottomans were erected as the arch-enemy of Christianity, the West, or Western civilization. When someone would embrace Islam, people would say about them that they were making themselves Turks, meaning that they're switching to the enemy side. So further in time, we have the conquest of Spain, 1492, we have the colonization. Another narrative emerged, and this narrative is about Muslims being inferior to, and Islam being inferior to Christianity in the West civilization. So not only there were enemies, but there were these barbaric people, uncivilized, that we need to civilize. Fast forward to the 1970s, 1980s, there is the Iranian Revolution, the Cold War. The Soviet bloc was the enemy, but because they were allied with these revolutionaries in Iran, they became a threat by extension. Last piece of the puzzle, 9/11, the war on terror in the Middle East, in South Asia, in Europe and North America, acted as a symbolic collective punishment for all Muslims because, Islam was in the collective imaginary this barbaric, violent religion, and all Muslims across the globe, these barbaric and violent people. But can you see the thread? If you go to France, the narrative is against North Africans specifically. If you go in the UK, the narrative is against South Asians. If you go to Poland, the narrative is specifically against Arabs and Chechens. In Germany, the narrative is against the Turks. All these people are from the ex-colonies or from centers which have historically been seen and perceived as being the enemy. So the Dutch colonized Indonesia, but unlike the UK or France, the Netherlands never used Indonesian labor to rebuild the country after World War II. And unlike other European countries, the Netherlands don't have a huge population of Indonesians. So I guess if it was the case, we would see very, very different things in the Netherlands nowadays. Although people hate Islam or the idea of Islam they have, if tomorrow you question them about Indonesians, they would not know what to say because all the narratives about, crime, stealing jobs, it doesn't work. Also, most people do not realize that there are Southeast Asians who are Muslim, because in the collective imaginary, again, the Muslim is either Middle Eastern or South Asian. On top of this colonial history that has designed who to target with, who is the enemy, the societies throughout history always had some kind of hatred or disdain towards the lower socioeconomic classes. Before there was immigration, people like homeless people were looked down upon. People would always scapegoat the poorest in the society or the most vulnerable. And people rarely have questioned the role of the government in pitting people against each other. And to illustrate the power of these symbolic narratives, I want us to look at the place of Arabs in America, in North America and the US before 9/11. They were seen as a model minority because they were generally highly educated, highly qualified. They were high earners. They were a model minority, like an example of integration and like the American dream. But once 9/11 happens, like all this narrative gets turned upside down. They become the suspects by default, the enemy. Have you noticed any negative rhetoric against Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates? Some of the Gulf countries in France, in the UK, are buying historical real estate. So part of British and French history, literally, they violate human rights. They commit assassinations in broad daylight. They are responsible for the funding and the spreading of a very particular political interpretation of Islam. When it comes to nationalists, you'll see a lot of hatred against the poorest immigrants, but you'll never hear anything against Saudi Arabia. So who takes over cultural or historical heritage sites in France, in the UK? Who literally owns sports clubs? What power do immigrants from North Africa, from South Asia really have? People hate on the powerless instead of hating on the people who actually have the money, the power, who actually take over cultural historical heritage, who take over key parts of the society, institutions and structures, and who have control, actual control over what is said or not said. And this is why you have people who are very, very vocal about violations of human rights in Iran or in Afghanistan. But curiously, like no one will say anything about human rights violations in Saudi or the Emirates. So are you going to criticize a business partner? And even though a lot of Muslims in France, in the UK and elsewhere in Europe really disapprove with Saudi Arabia and don't want to have like anything to do with them because specifically of these issues. I hope this video was useful, and as always, take care of yourselves and each other.